Howdy, folks. This is Chris White, and you're listening to Basic Business Advice. Here today again with Tyler, our producer. As a reminder, Tyler's out there freelancing right now. So if you need Tyler, look up Needing Media. He's on all socials and available to meet your producing and multimedia needs.
Appreciate it.
Very good. And today we've got Eric Gerber. Eric is a friend of mine. We've been friends for going on a decade probably?
Yeah, probably so.
And we became friends because Eric was my banker for when we got started and we got going here at the firm. And so I brought Eric on because recently, in the last 2 years, you chose to change careers.
Yeah.
You chose to jump off one horse midstream and jump on another.
Yep.
And currently you're the human resources and employee leadership development director at Eques.
Correct.
So that was a lot of words.
It's a mouthful.
Absolutely. We want to find out all about that. We want to hear about that and really want to get down into how did you make that decision and what it was. But let's set the stage first, because this isn't the first time you've made a move. You come from a background where you said you spent 2 decades in the family business. What was that?
So it was a hospitality business. My in-laws had a restaurant, hotel. Well, it started out just as a restaurant and gift shop. We expanded it to a restaurant, hotel, and banquet facility. And so I spent, 20 years back doing hospitality.
And that was just right out of high school, right into the family business, or?
No. So, got a degree at Kent State. Really wasn't looking to go to college. Growing up, my grandfather had an excavating business in the area, and that always intrigued me. In the summertime when I was a kid, where I grew up in Berlin, a lot of the houses were being built at that time.
Right.
And so I would, if my grandpa was in the area working, my grandpa and my uncle, it was usually up, dressed, breakfast, out the door. And my mom would have to call my grandma to find out where my grandpa was working, because that's usually where I was.
Sure.
And I was either sitting on a dirt pile watching him dig a basement, grade a yard, or at that time OSHA wasn't around, so I was sitting on his lap on a piece of equipment, just riding with him.
Right.
So my intentions coming out of high school was, I'm gonna help him.
Yeah.
And hopefully take the business over someday.
Sure.
My dad suggested that maybe you ought to go to college and just get a degree. If nothing else, that will help you in business. But if something would happen to go awry, you'd have something to fall back on.
Mm-hmm. The classic alternative.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, graduate from college. I'm engaged to get married. We get married in August. That June, my grandpa isn't feeling well. He goes to the doctor, finds out that he has cancer. And at that time, my uncle was pretty much running the business at that time. He passes away in November. My uncle and I sat down and talked, and we were kind of like, okay, we're going to keep it going. Now my responsibility on the backside is going to increase because he needs help. Get to March, getting ready to start the season. Hey, I'm going to sell the business unless you want it. I'm going into teaching. I'll stick around to help you, but that I'm going back to school. Well, talk about, I could go out and stake out a basement. I could dig a basement. I could grade yards. I could do all of that stuff. But when it came to the back end, the business side of it, and being able to figure out how to, do estimates and all of that stuff, place bids, I had no clue.
Sure.
I could do billing.
Yeah.
But I had no clue. At the same time, my wife's family, they were going through a couple issues. She had a brother that passed away unexpectedly. She had a younger brother who was very involved back at the restaurant at the time. And he unfortunately had a mental breakdown. And so all of this culminates with, here I am needing a career change.
Sure.
So, okay, let's try the hospitality business. 3 weeks, 6 weeks into it, I'm like, what in the world am I doing here? But we always had, my wife and I always had an agreement. I'm not going to make a job change unless I've got something else lined up.
Sure.
So I wasn't just going to quit, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And it took me 20 years to kind of figure that out. And when I decided to make that change, that was a whole different process. There was aspects of the hospitality business that I liked. I liked the people end of it. I liked the ability to sit down and talk with them, help them at times. I really liked the construction end of it when we were expanding, building the new restaurant, the banquet room, the hotel. Those were really the fun things.
Yeah.
But hospitality business is not easy, as you are aware of, and especially the restaurant business. I mean, your margins are tight. You've just got to constantly be watching everything.
Yeah.
So when that time had come to make a change, really how it came about was I had a friend of mine that you know, Bruce Hampshire, who had decided to leave his job as a pastor. And I walked up to him that day that he made the announcement, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he goes, "I have no clue." And I was like, "What?" He goes, "I have no clue."
Yeah.
He goes, This is a faith journey I'm going on." So we went home from church that day, and my wife asked me on the way home, she goes, "Hey, what's Bruce doing?" And I said, "He has no clue."
Right.
And she's like, "What?" I said, "He has no clue. He's going on a faith journey." She looked at me and she goes, "Don't even think about it."
She saw the light in your eyes.
Yeah. So, he kind of went through his thing, and in at the same time, there were some things that I was kind of struggling with, trying to work through, because as my years progressed at the restaurant and the hospitality business, I went from, the day-to-day manager, eventually made it to where I was kind of overseeing everything.
Sure.
So, there's a lot of responsibilities that come in there, and it being a family business, of course, you have many opinions when you have a lot of siblings that are either around or involved, which creates additional pressures.
Sure. Everybody's got an idea.
Everybody's got an idea. Everybody has a idea about how you should handle things. So I was really struggling with some of that stuff. It was causing some stress. And I met with Bruce, and Bruce kind of started coaching me a little bit on how to handle some of those things. And we sat down one day and began talking, and he looks at me and he goes, "You really, this is not your thing." He said,
Bruce has a way of doing that.
Yeah, he's really good at figuring that out real quick. And he goes, "I want to tell you something." He said, "Hard work won't kill you," but he said, "Stress will." And he said, "Right now you are in a very stressful position." So I said, "Yeah, Bruce, but I got to find something." And he goes, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, Carol and I have this agreement that I'm not going to turn in my notice until I've got something else lined up." And he goes, "Well, look what I did." And I go, "That's great. You've got to convince her that I can do that." And he goes, "You don't worry about her." He goes, "Let's start the journey." So he really coached me along, and it was nothing more than a walk of faith. I mean, it really was. We just simply said, "All right, Lord, you're in control."
So let's get real clear on this. This wasn't an issue that you weren't good at your job.
No.
This wasn't an issue that you couldn't deal with the things that were happening.
No.
This was, you were making a choice for Eric.
I was making a choice for Eric, and I was making a choice for my family.
Yeah.
And No, I mean, the two things that were really hard. One, didn't have anything lined up. Mm-hmm. Two, the position I was sitting in, I had 5 weeks of vacation if I wanted it. And on top of that, I could come and go when I wanted to.
Sure.
I was, at that time, making the most amount of money that I had made in my career. Mm-hmm. And it was a family business. I mean, I was probably in a position where eventually I would be able to really take over the business and pretty much run it the way I wanted to.
Right.
But then again, I might not have. So it wasn't because I wasn't performing. Mm-hmm. It was, I've got to do something different for my family.
Yeah.
And for me.
And then logically, banking is that thing.
Well, and what's interesting about that is my dad was in banking when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And he worked for a regional bank while I was in high school. And there was pressures that came with that. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget him going through some of the pressures and some of the things that he was going through at that time. And I can tell you exactly where I was standing when I looked at my dad and said, one thing that I will never do, Dad, is I will never get into banking. You can count on that.
I most definitely never said anything like that to my father.
I was about to say. Yeah. I feel like that happens to everyone at some point in time.
To be fair, I said I would never be a judge.
Okay.
I have not done that yet.
Not yet, Chris.
Put you on the ballot.
No, thank you.
I'll write you in.
No, thank you.
So as we worked through the process, as Bruce worked through the process with me, trying to figure out, and that's what we did. Him and I sat down and he said, what if you could do anything in the world, mm-hmm. you could pick what you wanted to do, what would you do? And I said, how specific? And he said, let's just list stuff. So we began listing things. Well, I enjoy being around business. I enjoy helping people. I enjoy, it would be really cool to somehow be able to work with business people and help make them successful.
Right.
In the meantime, his wife, Jocelyn, was talking with Carol and kind of helping her through the process. And at that same time, Carol was talking also with Janice Hirschberger up at Mount Eaton Counseling Center up there. And they were both, working with her and saying, hey, if things would go awry, would you be happy if you had to sell everything you own and live in a house trailer with you and your husband? And my wife said, I don't care where we have to live, but as long as he's happy and there's not stress, I don't care what he has to do. And she said, then let him take the faith walk and you walk alongside of him. And I'll never forget, we sat down and we were talking one day at dinner. And she said, there's one of two things that are going to happen. She goes, either you're going to change jobs at this point, or she said, me and the boys are going to visit you 6 feet under. And she said, I'm not ready to visit you 6 feet under because of the stress that you have on your life.
Sure.
Man.
And I didn't realize this until it was about a year later. We were on vacation and she looked at me and she said, you're a lot more fun to be around. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she goes, there were times where me and the boys were on edge to talk to you about stuff because of how stressed you are. And I said, really? Is it that different? She said, yeah. So that initial move was key. Now, in that whole move, and this is, again, Bruce at his finest, Bruce said, all right, you're taking the faith walk. You're making this move. He goes, be prepared. Because he said, you're going to have other opportunities. Mm-hmm. And he said, some will be good. Some will not. Mm-hmm. Some will pique your interest. And he said, I encourage you to move through it. But he said, others you'll just know right away. Mm-hmm. So I was like, oh, great. The last thing I want to be doing is jumping from job to job to job every 2 years or whatever it may be. But there were. So I had an opportunity really as I got out, which was very interesting. I had put my application in, talked with a number of different people. You know, we were just weighing options. It was 11:30 in the morning of my last day. I get a phone call from Trent Troyer, First Fed, offering me a position to come and work at First Fed.
Sure.
And it was like, okay, let's give it a shot. Really enjoyed what I did there. I was just doing home mortgages. But good people to work with, had some really good people that kind of trained me and that I was working with. Everything was going good. And had been there just a little over 2 years. I'm at Classic in the Country. Jason Hummel comes up to me. Jason and I have been friends for years.
Sure.
And Jason says, hey, by the way, he goes, just to give you a heads up, he goes, Bud Stebbins, my boss, is going to be calling you. I was like, for what? He goes, just listen to him. And I said, I'm not ready to make a change. I like what I'm doing. He goes, just listen to him. And I had talked with some people in the banking industry, and they had told me, if you ever get a chance to go commercial and be a commercial lender, you really want to look at it because there's a lot of different things that you can do.
Sure.
You know, it's a little more, I describe it as a square peg in a round hole versus a round hole, or a round peg in a square hole, you know, type of thing. You've got more options. Had an opportunity to become a commercial lender with Commercial and Savings Bank. Chose to take it and spent 12 years there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of got me to, and, you know, the thought process through that, and as I got into it and understood what I was doing and saw what I was doing and meeting people and developing relationships was, hey, you know, I'll probably end my career here. I just enjoyed it. You know, there's, as with every vocation that you're in, there's always little frustrations here and there, but you work through them. But I did, you know, had no intentions of changing until I got a phone call one day from Kevin at Eques, and hey, let's sit down and have some coffee. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, it's not a banking. Okay.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I got to, how I got there. You know, Kevin.
Let's recap this then real quick. 20 years, family business, hospitality, you know, restaurant, hotel, banquets, the whole 9 yards. 14 years total banking. Two at First Fed, 12 at CSB.
Yeah, something like that.
So
yeah,
14 years there, and now 2 years at EcoSeal.
Yeah.
What prompted that? Because you said, I'm going to end my career here. I'm going to end my career banking.
Two things. One, it was an opportunity to get back into or get close to your first love, my first love, which was dirt and diesel fuel.
Sure, sure.
And second of all, it was an opportunity to step in and kind of help, counsel, whatever you want to call it, people.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? And develop leaders. I mean, we've got a lot of young, to me, they're kids that work for us. Good people. But young. And, you know, you've got some that obviously they're looking that, hey, EcoSeal isn't my last step. You know, I want to start my own business, or I want something more. And as Kevin and I talked, Kevin said, this is an opportunity for you to use some of your experience and be able to share with them some of the things that you went through and some of the struggles you went through, and maybe help them either develop their leadership skills or develop them as a person where they can move on, start their own business, or maybe do something totally different.
Yeah.
And you've got the experience and can coach them at times. And, we sat down and I asked him, I said, Kevin, can you kind of put a job description together so I can really get an idea of what you're looking at? And he did. Him and Tony wrote something up, and we met like 5 or 6 times before a decision was made. And I'll never forget taking the job description home and sitting down with Carol and reading through it. And she looked at me and she goes, who wouldn't want this job?
Sure.
She goes, really? You get to work with people, but yet you get to make a difference in their life if they want it. Mm-hmm. I was like, yeah, I do. She goes, Eric, that's your fit. So praying about it, met with Bruce a couple more times, and the funny thing about it is when I sat down and I met with Bruce, he just started laughing. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, you knew about this, didn't you? And he, well, I don't know if I actually knew about it, but I knew that this was something you were going to get into. And decided to make the change. That was the hardest decision to make.
Yeah.
Because I loved the people at CSB. I had no complaints. Mm-hmm. I loved who I worked with. I loved who my bosses were. I loved going out and meeting, business people, developing relationships like you and I have been able to develop. But there was always something, I always felt like there was something missing. And I couldn't put my finger on it. Sure. And I just was like, hey, it is what it is. Mm-hmm. God, you called me here. I'm going to do what you told me to do. I'm here. This is how I will finish my career.
34 years to find a job that was fulfilling with the stress level that you wanted. Mm-hmm. And you had to be willing, though, to go. Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like Carol's mindset shift from 14 years prior to 2 years ago was huge as well.
Yeah, it was. Because funny thing about it was, so the first day I met with Kevin, I met with him that morning, went out to the main office, had a meeting with Jason and Bud. We went to lunch. We came back. I was blessed with an increase in my wage in the middle of the year, which, happens from time to time. But, I get this, oh, by the way, your base is going up. Mm-hmm. And I come home and I'll never forget this. Carol's out on the deck, sitting on the deck reading. And she goes, hey, how was your day? I said, well, it was really interesting. Mm-hmm. And she goes, how was your meeting with Kevin? So I told her about meeting with Kevin. She goes, what'd you do the rest of the day? And I said, oh, by the way, here. And I throw this piece of paper down. And I had where my base was going to. And she looks at this and she goes, what's this? And I said, oh, that's where my base is going to. Mm-hmm. She goes, you're kidding me. And I said, no. She goes, well, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. I said, but I'll tell you this much. I said, either way, I win. I said, not sure. We hadn't got into the gory details on the EcoSeal side, but I said, either way, I win.
Right.
Not that life is all about, you need to have a healthy salary to be able to live.
Right.
But that's not when you get to where you're an empty nester and, things are taken care of. That's not the biggest contributing factor to going.
Yeah.
So the whole point of why we do these podcasts is to hear people's stories and ask them questions that might resonate with the people who are listening out there. In fact, I was just texting with somebody this morning who said, I'm just finished listening to David Anthony Kaufman's that we did last month. And he said this, and he said this, and it's really making me thinking about the way I've been approaching my business.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
And so the practicality of it is you've made 3 choices in the past, 16 years that have influenced your career path. You were also very clear. Avoiding stress is not possible. You're going to have it wherever you are.
Yeah.
It's part and parcel to the gig.
Yeah.
That's the thing. But there are people, especially after the last 3 years, looking at the job market, looking at their career, questioning whether this is what they want for themselves. How would you, as somebody who's done it now, and then you found one that we're not going to say this is where you're going to retire. Hopefully it is.
Yeah. Well, Carol hates when I make this comment, but I'm going to make it anyways. So I started October 4th, 2021.
Yeah.
I haven't worked a day since then.
Yeah.
That's the way it's been. I mean, we've gone on vacations, we've gone on different trips here and there. I have never had the blues of coming back to work. I've had the blues of coming back to Ohio because it's gray and brown and whatever. But I haven't had a morning yet where I've woke up and said, man, I really am not looking forward to going to work.
So how, if somebody was in that space, maybe stress can be a motivator,
right?
But maybe how would you tell someone to identify whether this is time for them to consider a move?
I think you really have got to do some soul searching. And I think if you can find a pastor, a counselor, a friend, or somebody that you can sit down and you can just kind of bare your heart. This is what I'm feeling. This is where I'm at. And then be able to kind of talk through, well, let's look at pros and cons of what you're doing right now. I mean, that's really what Bruce did with me. Mm-hmm. We sat down, we made a list of pros and cons because he said, well, maybe it's something on the hospitality side. Maybe it's just something that we need to tweak here, and I can help you tweak that. Maybe that's all that it is.
Yeah.
But then as we made the pros and cons, it became very clear. Yeah, it's time to make a change.
I like that. So what you're saying is the solution, you need to be open to the solution, maybe change how you do what you do where you are.
Yeah.
Instead of change where you are.
Yeah, exactly.
My wife and I have always done the pros and cons list. There's probably been a dozen times now in our marriage. We've only been married for 4 years, but where we've literally had Post-it notes and made a list on the wall for decisions we needed to make. Yeah. Whether my wife was in grad school and job changes and things like that. And I tell friends, I said, if you're going to make a pros and cons list, we not only make a pros and cons list because the normal way, but I also put a value to each thing on that pros and cons list. So if on one side it says more time with my family, that's a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
And if money means a 2 to me, it's a 2. And it's like this side might be full, but if the value that it adds together is, nothing compared to this side.
Yeah, you got 20 things on this side that add up being 10 points, and you've got 2 things on this that are 12.
Yep. Yeah. And that's something I've encouraged people to do because pros and cons list is, you see it. It's right in front of you.
Yeah.
But we started adding a value system to it because we were looking at it and we're like, oh, these are kind of similar. Like it's about the same on each side. It's like, yeah, but this is way more important to us than this is.
Yeah.
And I love what you were talking about with making a decision and having all these things flood to you as well, and job offers and things like that. It's so hard to choose the right thing
Yeah.
when there's a lot of other good things as well. Because so often you get offered good things.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, this isn't the best option though, or this isn't, what I'm supposed to do. But
So the other thing is I have two people in my life that I know I can go to who will tell me what I need to hear, not what I want to hear.
oh yeah,
And one is Bruce.
Yep.
The other person is Art Yoder. Art and I have been friends from little on up.
Sure.
And I can sit down with those two guys right there, and I can say, okay, here's what I'm going through, here's what I'm looking at doing, and here's, and they both will sit there and say, you're kind of being stupid.
yep,
Have you thought of this? Here are things that you need to consider. Oh, I haven't thought of that. Well, okay, here you go.
Yeah. This is solid advice.
Yeah.
Man. This is very solid.
So,
And I feel like we should give a shout out to Bruce.
yeah, for sure.
Bruce Hampshire. He's
Yeah.
got Toward the Goal Ministry. They do coaching for businesses. They do coach leaders. They work with their teams and the whole 9 yards. They're based out of Sugar Creek.
yeah.
Wes Miller is one of the guys with him. I don't know the entire crew with him anymore. Jocelyn is with him.
Andy, what's Andy's last name? He was worked at Killbuck. Why can't I think of Andy?
You're going to gap
Andy
on
Raver.
Andy Raver.
Andy
Okay.
Raver. Sorry, Andy.
That's all right. But if anybody is like, I don't have somebody, we do. I mean, Bruce has worked with our team. Wes has come and spoke to my attorneys at our quarterly retreats. I mean, if somebody doesn't have that, Bruce and his team are great people to go to.
Yeah,
It's awesome.
absolutely. And I've talked with people and I've said, hey, if you have questions, call me. I'll be glad. I'll be glad to at least share my testimony,
Sure.
so to speak, of how I managed through it. Because I think, and again, nothing negative towards our area, but I think there's a lot of people too that get caught into, well, my dad started this business.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to follow in his footsteps.
Yeah.
And they've been around the business their whole lives and to absolutely hate it,
Yeah.
just because they've been around it and want to do something different, but they feel like they can't because dad has kind of made them feel like,
Sure.
you need to step in and you're the succession. You're my succession plan.
Yeah. Well, I pointed to this before, and actually is a guy who changed how he did where he was. Robbie Keim,
Yeah.
5th generation.
Yeah.
Keim family. He thought he was, I have to run this thing. And they hired Jim Smucker, who actually is going to be our keynote speaker at the business conference this year to start off the day. And Robbie was stepped back and then reinserted himself where he brought the most value.
Yeah.
But it wasn't as the CEO anymore.
Yeah.
And that was to the side of maybe it's not a change in your venue, but a change in how you engage
Yeah.
where you are.
Well, there's this idea that you've got to be the top of you've got to be the head of the food chain, so to speak, within the business, just simply because you got the name or you've got the relationship or whatever. It doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
You may not be good at leading people, but you may be really good at something else within the organization. There's nothing wrong with doing that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's great examples of people out there who do that.
Yeah.
So, Eric, thank you so much for sharing your
welcome.
story today. This is awesome.
Yeah.
And I, as you said, if somebody wants to look you up and says, hey, could you talk to me about this? You're open to
Yeah, very
this
much
conversation.
So. Is one of the things that Bruce said to me is he said, as you go through it, the one thing that you've got to realize is that your story needs to be shared for other people.
Yeah.
And I mean, any way I can help somebody, because being miserable is not fun.
No, it's not. Well, Eric, thanks for joining us today. Tyler,
Thank you.
as always, thanks for being here to produce with us. I do want to make a quick announcement. This November 2nd, the 11th Business Conference, GapCon's second year. We've got November 2nd at the Encore Hotel here in Berlin. Jim Smucker is going to start our day off. David Anthony Kaufman actually is our keynote speaker at the end of the day. We're going to have 3 tracks during the day. We're going to have a team track that Jordan Mullet, a friend of the podcast, is going to lead for 3 sessions. We're going to have Fierce Creative, co-sponsoring of the event, going to lead a 3-track section on marketing. And then this year, because we see adult use marijuana probably coming down the pipeline at us, either through legislation or a constitutional amendment, we're going to do an entire HR section on the changes that employers can expect to see with the potential legalization of marijuana on this fall's ballot. And so we're going to have an entire HR section just dedicated towards adult use marijuana and its potential implications to our workforce. So if anybody's interested in knowing more about that, it's gapconohio.com, and you can register on there. Early bird tickets are open until September 1st. So on behalf of everybody here, this is Chris White. Thanks for listening.